about you on dark nights. I think about you when I see your light. Dark star. Dark star in the night.
Good evening and welcome to the continuing Fredericton Region Museum speaker series, marking the accomplishments of famed ufologist Stanton Friedman, who's a longtime resident of our historic city. My name is Hal Scarab, and I have the privilege of serving as the Vice President of the York Sunbury Historical Society, which supports the Fredericton Region Museum. Our guest this evening is Kathleen Martin. She is Betty's niece, pretty direct connection, and currently a leading ufologist who since 1990 has been researching the perplexing nature of UFOs and the non-human entities associated with highly advanced aerial vehicles. She does not do this through the work of others. She does her own groundbreaking research, investigation, and experimentation. She has closely examined archival collections and the US government's involvement in the investigation of UFOs and its major studies. This has given her a very broad depth of knowledge that few possess. She earned her BA in social work and was employed as an educator and education services coordinator while attending graduate school. She is a certified practitioner of regression hypnosis and the quantum healing hypnosis technique. Additionally, she offers the Awakening Soul Support Group for experiencers who feel an intense calling to be part of the answer and to assist others who are beginning to awaken to their relationship with NHI. Her interest in UFOs and contact began in 1961, when her aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill, had their close encounter and subsequent abduction in New Hampshire's White Mountains. She spent 15 years painstakingly investigating the Hill abduction case and continues to seek the scientific analysis of compelling evidence. She has worked on 3 comprehensive studies on nearly 5,000 experiencers, 2 of which she initiated and saw to the end, and has 5 professionally published books. Her bestseller with nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman, 1934 to 2019 was his time frame, was Captured, Betty and Barney Hill, the UFO Experience. She and Stanton worked together for nearly 14 years and collaborated on 2 additional books, Science Was Wrong and Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. Her book with Denise Stoner, The Alien Abduction Files, includes her investigation of 6 intergenerational cases of abductions and contact. Her 5th book, Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted, is a comprehensive guide to contact for experiencers and those who love them, professionals, those who work with experiencers, and the interested public. She is additionally a contributor to the Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation's Beyond UFOs, Saucers of Consciousness, and Contact with Non-Human Intelligence. Her essays have been published in several additional books and magazines. Her books are available in all formats on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and so on. Autographed copies can also be purchased on her website. She has given on-camera commentary on the Discovery, History, National Geographic, Destination America, Science, and Travel channels, and on several documentaries. Most recently, her work has been featured on Ancient Aliens and several Travel Channel shows. Kathleen has lectured at conferences across the United States and Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and the UK. And she's given video lectures in Denmark and China. Please welcome Kathleen Marden.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. And as you know, this lecture is about Stanton Friedman, the man and his ideas, and more so what he has taught me and the work that we did together. So you probably know the top part of this, the things that we did about his life and his education, but I have to say that Stanton was a visionary with a brilliant mind. He was the people's ufologist. He was a perfect gentleman, a comedian. He was kind. generous, and a loving person. Stanton grew up in Linden, New Jersey, and that was a working class town. Only about 20% of the kids who went to Linden High School went on to college. And Stanton graduated valedictorian of his high school class at age 16. He was accepted to MIT, but due to financial circumstances, he could not go. So he had a full scholarship to Rutgers University. He went to school there for 2 years, and then he transferred on scholarship to the University of Chicago, where he studied physics. He earned his bachelor's and master's degrees. Now, over the years, many people have doubted that Stanton has the credentials that he had. And Stanton was always happy to prove that he was indeed a nuclear physicist and that he had graduated from a very prestigious college. But this is another proof that Stanton graduated with a master's degree from the University of Chicago. There was a University of Chicago Alumni Association published in 2011 on his life and work. And this is the beginning of the article. Well, Stanton thought that he would always be a nuclear physicist. He was very successful. He, over about 12 years, had become a senior physicist in some of the projects that he worked on. But he was an itinerant physicist, as were all of them, because they worked on government projects. And they would get to a certain point, generally at about the end of 3 years, and the funding would be withdrawn and given to someone else. So Stanton said that he essentially would move from place to place, but work on the same projects. But it was difficult for his family. Well, Stanton's first book on UFOs was the report on unidentified flying objects by Edward Ruppelt. And Edward Ruppelt had been the first director of the Air Force's Project Blue Book in 1952 and 1953. So Stanton he said he was a cheapskate, and he needed to order just one more book in a book order, and he would get free shipping. So he was looking around for books, and he saw this one, and he thought, well, that looks interesting. And he read it, and there was information, very compelling information, for the reality of unidentified flying objects in that book. Captain Ruppelt wrote a book about a study that he had worked on with a team of scientists, and it was actually a chi-square analysis. And it had started in 1947 and went through 1952. And you probably heard of Project Sign and Project Grudge, but he talked about this project where they had 4,400 cases. And of those 4,400 cases, 1,593 were selected for the study. The rest were thrown out. I guess they just weren't quality sightings. So in the end, 26.94% of these cases were in the unknown category. The rest were just prosaic explanations, psychological hoaxes, meteorological, conventional aircraft, birds, etc. Stanton always said that it was a good thing that he didn't purchase Donald Menzel's book, Flying Saucers, a great astronomer explains the facts. Well, he didn't explain the facts. He was a disinformant. And we have evidence of that that we've included in one of our books. But Stanton said if he had read Dr. Donald Menzel's book, that he would never have looked beyond that, because he just explained away flying saucers. And incidentally, Dr. Menzel was a professor at Harvard University, an astrophysicist, and he was very closely connected to the federal government's projects and would travel from place to place. He was a very well-connected scientist. And he, starting in 1953, January of 1953, was sort of in the background for what was called the Robertson Panel. Dr. Menzel had begun badgering the Air Force in the summer of 1952. I have that in my files. He had a prosaic explanation for anything flying in the sky, and that's what he said that he was going to present. He met with the leaders of the Air Force at the Pentagon and presented his idea, and they replied, why should they support this statement with a just very simple scientific experiment? What Dr. Menzel was doing is he was doing what the Robertson Panel asked, and that is he used logical deduction in order to explain away UFOs, not the evidence, not the facts, but a way to cover it up. Something else about Dr. Menzel is that he is listed on MJ-12 as one of the members of MJ-12. And if you're familiar with Stanton, you know about that. Well, Stanton decided to start speaking about UFOs in 1968. He was still working as a nuclear physicist. And then in 1970, he became a full-time speaker. The reason he became a full-time speaker is because he had left Pittsburgh, where he had moved his family there. Stanton had a couple of children who had disabilities. And it was very, very difficult for the family to move, to find new doctors, new schools. It was really hard on Stanton's family. And he had moved them now out to California to work on his dream project, where he was going to be the physicist who was going to be figuring out what propelled UFOs. And he arrived out there and he was told, well, the funding for the project has been withdrawn. So he had 6 months, and at the end of 6 months, he said, I'm not going to move my family again. They like it out here. I'm going to find something else. Maybe I'll find another job here, and maybe I won't. So he remade himself as the flying saucer physicist and started taking speaking engagements at colleges throughout the United States and Canada. Stanton rose to prominence in the UFO field at a time when many academic scientists were speaking publicly. They were speaking before Congress, they were speaking before the United Nations. Here we have Dr. James Harder. Dr. James Harder was a professor of civil engineering and bioengineering at Berkeley, at the University of California, Berkeley. And he was an outspoken advocate for experiencers of ET contact and an investigator of many of the major cases, including my aunts and uncles, including Travis Walton and Charlie Hickson and Calvin Parker and many others. Dr. Alan Hynek, who was the Air Force's Project Blue Book's astronomical consultant. He worked for Project Blue Book from the time it began until it closed at the end of 1969. And then he had so much information that he had collected during his review that he formed the Center for UFO Studies, where he became an outspoken proponent of the scientific study of UFOs. And then the man that Stanton praised more than any other scientist, whom he respected, and who I think he attempted to model himself after, was Dr. James E. McDonald. He was a very prominent meteorological physicist. He had been chairman of the physics department at the University of Arizona in Tucson. He became interested in the study of UFOs, and it took his time. So he ended up being co-chair of the department. But he really took the debunkers and the disinformants to task. By about this time, 1972, 1973, Stanton had written 4 conclusions that he had after more than 10 years of study. The evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. The subject of flying saucers represents a kind of cosmic Watergate. There are no good arguments against the first 2 conclusions, and we are dealing with the biggest story of the millennia. When Stanton lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he was part of the Flying Saucer Research Group. In fact, he was on the board of directors. And when Dr. Edward Condon, who was, I think, a disinformant, I have some evidence that he had agreed in advance to work for the Air Force for the outcome that they wanted. But Stanton was the spokesman for his group, and this is what he said in the newspaper. The report, prepared under the direction of Dr. Edward U. Condon of the University of Colorado, concluded the UFO phenomenon isn't worth investigating. But the 7-man board of directors of the 90-member UFO Research Institute said Condon's group was way off base. Friedman, who generally serves as the organization's spokesman, charged that the Condon Committee had prejudged the issue. This is borne out, he said, not only by the many negative public comments or statements made by Dr. Condon shortly after the study was undertaken, but also by the following remarkable comments by Dr. Condon in his report. Travel of men over interstellar distances in the foreseeable future seems now to be quite out of the question. It is safe to assume that no intelligent life outside our solar system has any possibility of visiting the Earth anytime in the next 10,000 years. These statements totally ignore studies by reputable space scientists, Friedman declared. And he was right. He had the evidence of this. And this is what we wrote about in one of our books, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. But even though the Project Blue Book closed as a result of the Condon Project, General Carroll H. Bolander in October of 1969 made the following statement. Moreover, reports of unidentified flying objects which could affect national security are made in accordance with JNAP 146 or Air Force Manual 55-11 and are not part of the Blue Book system. However, as already stated, reports of UFOs which could affect national security would continue to be handled through the standard Air Force procedures designed for this purpose. So here we have evidence that there were two avenues for reports. One, the debunking part that was presented to the public, and the other, the secret part. Here's Stanton. He's still working as a nuclear physicist at this time. You can see him at his desk without a beard, and then he's sporting a beard. And he has the photograph of the non-human entity that was my Aunt Betty Hill's escort. Stanton became interested in Betty's and Barney's case when he had the opportunity, before actually, he had the opportunity to have dinner with them when he lived in Pittsburgh. He had been on the local radio station several times. He knew the manager of the station, and the manager called him and gave him information about Betty and Barney, where they were staying. They were there to do a television show, and they were also on that radio station. So when my Aunt Betty was suffering from lung cancer and was in the final stages, she said to me, well, I know that you've been working for many, many years on your research and writing. I was writing her biography, actually, but so much of her biography was compelling evidence in her files and things that she told me. I went along the route with her time and time again. I played devil's advocate with her. My husband and I even went to along the route from Niagara Falls through Toronto, through Montreal, and back to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, just like Betty and Barney did. I wanted to see if there was any way we could possibly be so tired we would lose time or hallucinate, such as some of the skeptics were saying. And even though we were about 20 years older than Betty and Barney, we didn't hallucinate and we didn't get lost. So anyway, Betty said to me, if you need any help with this book that you're writing, I would recommend that you get in touch with Stanton Friedman. So not long after Betty's death in 2004, October of 2004, I contacted Stanton and I told him about the book that I had been working for. At that time, I didn't ask him to become involved with me, but he, over time, worked on a television program that the two of us did together. We talked some more about it. And then I met him at the MUFON, the Mutual UFO Networks Symposium in 2005, the summer. And I presented my proposal to him, my formal proposal. And he said to me, well, I'm not sure. I want to learn more about this. I want to read your manuscript. I want to see Betty's files. I'm the trustee of the estate. And so he arranged to come to my house. I was living in Stratham, New Hampshire at the time. And he spent a few days with my husband and myself. And we talked, I think, nonstop from morning till night. And he read through what I had written to that point. I allowed him to photocopy from my files of Betty's files. And finally, in the end, he said to me, I will work with you because you're being scientific in your research and you're unbiased. So I was very pleased with that. And, you know, because relatives can present a biased point of view. but I don't do that. I have a scientific mind. And right here is a little guy that I drew based on Betty's and Barney's written descriptions of the non-humans that they encountered. So when Betty was on the craft, she had finished with her examination, and she began to trust the leader because she had experienced pain when a very large needle was thrust into her navel. And this was before we used amniocentesis in a hospital setting, by the way. And she had gotten dressed. She had said to the leader, the one she called the leader, I call her escort, I know you're not from around here. Where's your home port? And he produced this three-dimensional map of somewhere in the universe. Betty didn't know exactly where. And he said, well, tell me, do you know where you are on this map? And she said, no, I don't know very much about the universe. And he said, well, if you don't know where you are, there wouldn't be any point in my showing you where I am. Well, she was very upset over this. And Dr. Benjamin Simon, who was the neuropsychiatrist who used a special hypnotic technique that he had developed during World War II and very successfully treated people who were returning with shell shock, with conversion hysteria, and returning them to their families and to their normal lives and their jobs. Betty and Barney were referred to him over Barney's conversion hysteria, is what they called it early on. He had a psychogenically induced trauma. We call it post-traumatic stress disorder today. And Dr. Simon was the person that he was referred to because Barney had been so ill over this experience that he and Betty had had that he ended up with bleeding ulcers. He was hospitalized. He had to take a 3-month leave of absence. And Dr. Simon worked with Barney very successfully and with Betty. He hypnotized them separately, and he reinstated amnesia at the end of each session so they couldn't compare notes. So as a social scientist, I had the opportunity to do a comparative analysis of Betty's and Barney's separate statements against dreams that Betty had had, 5 in all, that occurred 10 nights after her encounter and lasted for 5 days. They occurred very early in the morning, just before she woke up, and they contained some information that she had conscious recall for, but other information that she didn't remember. So to get back to the star map, Dr. Simon said to Betty, if you can remember this star map and it doesn't bother you too badly, I want you to go home and draw it for me. And she did. And this is her sketch. Well, Stanton's real involvement in all of this began when he was called in as a scientist to find other scientists who would vet Marjorie Fish's work. This is Marjorie holding another bust. She and Betty sculpted these together during a visit that Marjorie was making to Betty's home. And at that time, I was living with Betty. So I was a college student, and it was just after Barney had died in 1969 that I met Marjorie. So Marjorie was a school teacher. She ended up with a position at Oak Ridge National Laboratory as a research assistant there after she did her work on the star map. But she had quite a challenge. She had to go to the university and she had to hand copy all of the distance data and all of the characteristics of the stars out 54 light years in all directions from the sun. And then she would take that information home and she would build three-dimensional models using frames and beads of different sizes and colors on silk thread and in all directions. And after 5 years, she still didn't have a match. She was skeptical about this, but she thought that, well, if Betty had it, maybe this experience, maybe she would find a match. Well, finally, we made technological progress and we had better distance data on the stars out 54 light years. She went to the university, she copied all of that information. She went home, she looked through her models. She had 14 models at this point, and she found a near match. She moved the stars around to their proper location and added 3 stars that had not been known to us as being within 54 light years of the sun at the time that she built the other models. And lo and behold, she had a match. You can see that the line lengths, well, there are a couple of mistakes. This one she made longer and this one she made shorter. It should have been the other way around. But most of them, look at this, very, very close. I think that's quite remarkable. But beyond that, there is more information. This is Marjorie's identification. She, according to her identification, Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 were probably the home stars to these entities who had trade routes. The solid lines were trade routes and the dotted lines were expeditions. Well, Stanton did find scientists who were willing to vet Marjorie's work. Dr. Alan Hynek was one of them, and he said that her work was accurate, as did the other scientists who vetted her work. In fact, Stanton was able to find a scientist, an astronomer, who said that these stars are all in a plane, which means that it would be easier to go from nearest star to nearest star, sort of like pizza on, or pepperoni on pizza, as opposed to raisins spread out through a fat loaf of raisin bread. And this astronomer said that if we were on Zeta Reticuli and we wanted to visit the nearby solar systems that probably had life, this is one of the stops we would make. We would follow these routes. So that was very important. Now let's listen to what Stanton had to say about that.
The star pattern makes sense from nearest star to nearest star to nearest star. The sun is part of the pattern. Quite remarkably, every one of the stars in the pattern is the right kind for planets and life. And all of the right kind of stars for planets and life in this volume of space are part of the pattern. The star.
Well, Stanton was the first scientist to publish on Marjorie's work. And basically what it said is, after 6 long years of careful detective work, a dedicated researcher has finally pinpointed the origin of UFOs. And it was in Saga magazine for men, and B. Ann Slate was a professional writer, and she and Stanton collaborated on this issue. He then was able to attract the attention of Terence Dickinson, an astronomer for Astronomy magazine, and he wrote an article for the magazine about the Zeta Reticuli incident, and it was huge. It attracted many, many readers. And then Stanton convinced him to publish this pamphlet of several pages highlighting all of this with commentary by some of the proponents and some of the skeptics. Well, Stanton has always been a proponent of Marjorie Fish's work, but after Marjorie died, there was another rival proponent of another star system who was a skeptic, and he everywhere. I don't know if you've ever seen it before, but as a ufologist, I did, and Stanton did as well. We were working in Roswell that weekend that this information was released, and I have never seen Stanton so angry in my entire life, because it said that Marjorie Fish admitted that she had made a mistake and that this star map was not a match for Betty's work. This went against every scientist who had really taken a while to vet Marjorie's work. And so Stanton contacted Marjorie's eldest niece, who was very close to Marjorie and the executor of her estate. And this is what she said. The pastor who officiated at the funeral only met with us once and got some of the basic facts turned around. But since only the family attended, and I thought he would no longer be involved, I did not correct him. Someone at the funeral home offered to send an announcement of Marjorie's death to organizations he thought that she had been involved in, from some of the various printouts we had shared from the internet. I have not inquired what was sent to whom, but being ignored by the public as a person after being ignored as a person for so many years, I did not think Marjorie's short obituary would receive such interest or provoke a word-for-word examination. Marjorie's work on Betty Hill's map is still viable and worthy of consideration. And by the way, an astrophysicist has recently updated the star map, looked all throughout the galaxy, the nearby galaxy, and discovered that Marjorie's interpretation or identification of Betty's map is still the top contender. So Stanton, here's Betty, and here's Stanton at a UFO conference. They often spoke at the same conferences. Betty and Marjorie were in a video film that Stanton was the writer of and appeared in as well. And Stanton had plenty of time to investigate the Hills case himself. One of the things that Stanton did that did not come to my attention until shortly before he passed away is that in 1976, he had written to John Luttrell. John had been the writer for the Boston Traveler and had been the individual who, as the result of a violation of confidentiality, carried the Hills story to the public. Betty and Barney never wanted their story to be told to the public. They were willing to speak to scientists, to UFO investigators. They talked to the family. We were sworn to secrecy. They talked to close friends, but there was a violation of confidentiality. We didn't know for years that John Luttrell had done his own investigation. And I can forgive him now. I was angry with him over the impact that he had on Barney, who had just been appointed to the US Commission on Civil Rights as a state advisory board member and had received other awards that year. He and Betty had been invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration as his guests, and I was as well that year. And everything sort of fell apart after this series of newspaper articles appeared in the Boston Traveler. But the reason I can forgive John Luttrell is because he wrote to Stanton. I can recall interviewing between 12 and 14 different people from different communities surrounding Franconia Notch, New Hampshire, none of whom knew one another, but all of whom remembered experiencing the same sighting at the same time the Hills did in the same location. And he said this was basically established by drawing comparable lines of sightings on an area map, and all intersected at precisely the same location reported by Mr. and Mrs. Hill. But John Luttrell said, look, I'm not a newspaper reporter anymore. I have a new job. I'm the director of community relations and development for this conservative hospital, and I don't want to get involved in this again. So I don't want you to publish this anywhere. And Stanton didn't. I think that's a testimony to Stanton's character. And this is the book on the right, the first book that we wrote. I have recently updated it. I have the 60th anniversary edition with new evidence that I have collected from scientists since the first book was published. And I also wrote a section on Stanton. So here we are shortly after our book was published at a speaking engagement. We often spoke together from the same stage. And then eventually, when he thought I was up to what he thought was acceptable to him, and he was always my mentor. He was always commenting on, and I had been a teacher, so I was accustomed to speaking, but he taught me his style. And when he thought I was sufficiently adept at it, he said, okay, you do it on your own now. And so I did. One thing that we did that I was really thrilled about is in September of 2011, the State of New Hampshire Historical Society, and you can see the state symbol up here at the top, erected a historical marker to Betty's and Barney's incident. And I was responsible for providing, I think it was 27 footnotes of writing what I suggested for the verbiage on the sign, and for sending them about, I think it was 15 or 20 books, the Air Force reports, articles, etc., to show that this did indeed occur. And there we are. Stanton and I were there for the 50th anniversary of Betty's and Barney's event. We spoke at the Indian Head Resort. The sign is located in front of the Indian Head Resort in North Lincoln, just south of Franconia Notch and across the street from Indian Head. It was a great time. We gave bus tours and spoke to a large audience. And I thought that, after I wrote that first book with Stanton, maybe that would be the end of it. And then he contacted me, and a little while later, a couple of years later, and he said, how would you like to collaborate on another book with me? And I said, well, tell me about it. What do you have in mind? And he said that he wanted to name it differently than what our publisher named it, but he wanted to call it That's Impossible, Isn't It? Because so many people on high made proclamations of impossibility. And in the end, they were wrong. And so this sounded very interesting to me because my bachelor's degree is in social work. And I was very interested in the eugenics movement in America. So I had the opportunity to write chapters on politics, personality, and childbed fever, the smallpox wars, the hemophilia holocaust, the eugenics movement in America, and methyl mercury in the food chain, and extraordinary visual feats, psi phenomena. These were the meta-analyses of the academic studies on psi phenomena, and the conundrum of alien abduction. Stanton wrote the rest, of course, about aerospace and technology and about UFOs as well. So we each wrote 7 chapters in that book. And then we started talking about a third book. Stanton said that he had always wanted to write a book on Donald Menzel. He had been to Dr. Donald Menzel's archival collection at Harvard. He was very perplexed by him. Why was Dr. Menzel doodling aliens, yet writing anti-UFO books and named on MJ12 as one of the scientists on the secret government study on UFOs? Well, Stanton found in Dr. Menzel's collection some of his autobiography, and also what he found was a letter from Dr. Menzel to John F. Kennedy saying, when we are properly cleared to one another, I can speak to you further on this matter. And Stanton was, what? A security clearance? Stanton had a Q clearance, but he was very surprised, and he started to look into this, and he discovered much more information about Dr. Menzel. And here we are at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Jennifer Stein took this photograph. She helped us with our research there. She helped me with my research on Philip Klass and his debunking of Betty Hill. And then with Stanton and myself, we have to thank her for her assistance with this. But Donald Menzel was a trustee and on the board of directors of the American Philosophical Society. His part of his collection there, his correspondence files, and Philip Klass, who was the major, probably the most outspoken anti-UFO propagandist of the 20th century, and a huge critic of Stanton and anyone else who was involved in the investigation, especially the scientific investigation of UFOs. So we read all through those files. We photocopied or photographed page after page, hundreds of pages from their files. Something that Stanton always wrote a book about in his books and spoke about at his lectures was Project Blue Book Special Report number 14. Earlier, I mentioned the earlier study, but Project Blue Book was completed in 1955, and it was a secret report done at the prestigious Battelle Memorial Institute with funding from the Air Force. Stanton loved it because it was full of charts and graphs and sketches. There was a chi-square analysis again, and there were 7 categories that the scientists attempted to identify these sightings by pilots, by Air Force officers, by military personnel, and by some members of the public. And so this is the breakdown. And the unknown category was the category where they were not, after thorough analysis, able to categorize craft as anything else. And in order to be in the unknown category, all three scientists had to agree that it was a true unknown, and the chance of this being simply a missed known was less than 1%. This is the quality analysis. Among the excellent quality group, 35.1% were unknowns. Despite this, Stanton found in that file that he discovered all of this information in out at the University of California in Berkeley, were government UFO lies. A letter by the Secretary of the Air Force, Donald Quarles. And what Donald Quarles said is, on the basis of this study, we believe that no objects, such as those popularly described as flying saucers, have overflown the United States. I feel certain that even the unknown 3% could have been explained as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been obtained. So, do you remember what those unknown percentages were? 26.94% in the first Air Force study and 21.5% in the second, not 3%. Well, Stanton is probably best remembered for his investigation of the Roswell UFO incident. This is at the museum in Roswell. Stanton went there from the time the museum was opened. People thanked him for putting Roswell on the map. At the time that Roswell happened, there was only a dirt road through town, I am told, but now every major hotel is there, and it has grown, and the museum has grown. I was just there earlier this month, and they have updated it, they have remodeled it, and they have beautiful exhibits at the museum now. Now, I didn't work with Stanton on the Roswell case, but I spoke to him about it. And so I'm going to just go over this. He wrote the books that were written on that. So the Roswell Daily Record, they captured a UFO in the region. And then Army finds air saucer on ranch in New Mexico. In the Chicago Daily News, this information carried, it was in other newspapers as well on July 8, 1947. But then the lid slammed shut when the Air Force decided to debunk it and to say that it was merely a weather balloon. They've called it other things over the years, such as crash test dummies, apparently time traveling crash test dummies who were made of wood and went back from when they were dropped in the early 1950s to 1947 when the debris was found. And everybody, Roswell was the home of the 509th Bomb Wing. The 509th Bomb Wing was a nuclear operation. I grew up near the 509th in Newington, New Hampshire. I was within 20 miles of that place. And Betty and Barney lived in the next town over, Portsmouth. But anyway, the Mac Brazel was treated pretty poorly by the Army Air Corps at that time. It became the Air Force in September of that year. And he was kept, he was interrogated. But strangely, after all of this, he ended up driving a brand new truck. Here are Stanton and I in the early years. We started speaking together in Roswell in 2008. And here we are, we always had the vendor table right in front of this exhibit. And this is Stanton's nemesis, you might say. I had talked about him earlier, debunker Philip Klass. And you can see down at the bottom that Philip Klass is just grinning. He looks like he's laughing, and so is he. And Stanton is smiling. I sort of think that Stanton maybe made a humorous comment, and this is why they were laughing. Stanton thought that they were friends of sorts, but, and he and Phil Klass really needed one another, I think, because Stanton loved to debate. He was a very strong debater. It was something that he'd learned and done for 3 years in high school. And he said that he had never lost a debate. So this is something that he loved to do with Philip Klass. Well, Philip Klass wasn't as nice as he might have seemed. He was a compromised researcher. He only came on the scene in 1966, the fall of 1966, after he'd read the 2 first books that he'd ever read on flying saucers, Incident at Exeter first, and then The Interrupted Journey about my aunt and uncle. And Philip Klass was taken to task a little bit earlier than that. The FBI file on him that I have states that he was in trouble with the FBI. He had violated their rules by publishing classified information. And they could have taken him to court, but in order to do that, they would have to declassify that information. So they didn't. He was also suspected as being a Russian spy. He had a relationship with a young man from the Russian embassy. He was seen at the Russian embassy. He was being tailed in Washington, D.C., where he lived. And this is what he later wrote. After he became the most outspoken anti-UFO propagandist. Regarding Allen Hynek, he wrote to the FBI, Allen Hynek is the spiritual leader of the vocal group of believers and kooks who believe that we are being visited by extraterrestrial spacecraft. And in part, this is the FBI's statement about Philip Klass's statement. Klass's attempts to discredit Hynek are totally without foundation. Hynek could scarcely have any better scientific credentials. All of his writings and public statements that were examined prior to his publication in an FBI journal disclose a meticulously objective and scientific view of the UFO phenomenon. So they said that Hynek was of impeccable character, but that Klass was of much more questionable character. And to demonstrate that, here's an official letter that Philip Klass wrote to the Hertzberg Institute of Astrophysics, National Research Council, Ottawa, Canada. Stan never knew about this until researcher Richard Dolan found it when he was doing research there. And this was written by Philip Klass in August of 1980. And he said, I regret that I must bring bad tidings into your UFO responsibilities. A noted ufologist and full-time lecturer of the snake oil salesman variety is moving to Canada, and he's going to cause major problems for you. He wrote, I have reason to believe that Canada will soon gain a noted ufologist, full-time UFO lecturer of the snake oil salesman variety, who will soon move to Canada to become its chief UFO guru. I'm not sure where he will take up residence, but I can assure you that you and your associates will be publicly accused of a UFO cover-up or cosmic cover-up, as he is prone to say, that dwarfs the Watergate scandal. He wrote, his 1-hour lecture is so filled with half-truths and falsehoods that it would take several hours to offer a rebuttal. And like wrestling with an octopus, when you manage to pin down one leg, the other 7 are still thrashing about. And he wrote, the foregoing should provide you with a capsule summary of the man and hopefully alert you to deal cautiously with him, knowing that he is inclined to distort the facts and exploit any ambiguity in your statements. Well, that was not Stanton at all. Philip Klass was describing himself. That was still, Philip Klass was the one who was distorting information, who was offering falsehoods and false speculation. Well, Stanton was very proud of this because he and Philip Klass had another round of contention when Stanton, after 11 years of research, actually, according to what I found when I researched this, Stanton had found evidence of MJ12 in government files. And Philip Klass, he sent Philip Klass some of this research, and Philip Klass said, it's not legitimate, that's false information. Look at the typeface. The federal government doesn't use that typeface. And so he challenged Stanton to find typeface of the other kind, Piker or Elite, and he offered him $100 for every letter he could find. So Stanton did his archival research, and he sent Klass 14 out of 20 that he had very easily found. So Philip had to send him a check for $1,000, which Stanton proudly displayed. Philip threatened to sue him over displaying this. And Stanton said, look, I've blacked out the bank account. This belongs to me. The check is in my name. So he didn't get sued. So finally, Stanton wrote the four major rules that debunkers seem to employ. What the public doesn't know, we certainly don't want to tell them. The largest official US Air Force UFO study isn't even mentioned in 12 anti-UFO books, though every one of those books' authors was aware of it. Don't bother me with the facts, my mind is made up. If you can't attack the data, attack the people, it's easier. And do one's research by proclamation rather than investigation. It's much easier, and no one will know the difference anyway. And Stanton did have to endure many attacks. I now want to play a statement that he made about this, and let me bring it up here.
If I pleased everybody, I certainly have not. That's the price you pay. I had a father-in-law who said, when you're playing bridge, if you don't get set once in a while, you're not bidding high enough. So if you can't stand the heat, as Harry Truman said, get out of the kitchen. I can stand the heat, and I will continue to do it as long as I can.
And now this is a video clip of Stanton, the nuclear physicist of high standing and internationally recognized nuclear physicist and UFO researcher. Listen to this.
Have you ever been in a mental institution?
No, I've never
had
been in a-
psychiatric care?
Never had
Do you have
psychiatric.
any scientific background?
I spent 14 years in industry as a nuclear physicist. I have bachelor's and master's degrees in physics from the University of Chicago. I worked for little companies like General Electric, Westinghouse, General Motors, along the American Nuclear Society, American Physical Society, American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, AAAS, American Association of Advanced Science.
Right.
Or published papers in scientific journals,
You're
etc.
a crazy scientist. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
Crazy for the truth.
Well, Stanton gave me permission to show that. Next is just some photographs. that were taken of us working together over the years. Here I am, is Eric Van Daniken, Dr. Lynn Kitai. She is a researcher on the Phoenix Lights. Here's Stanton. This is Reverend Michael Carter. This is Travis Walton, whose case Stanton also investigated, as have I. And here we are at a conference up on the stage for a panel discussion, taking questions from the audience. Here we are again. Jennifer had just won a big award for her movie on Travis Walton. Travis is Travis, and I was in that movie, and so was Stanton, and so was Rich Dolan. Here he is. And in 2013, Stanton was awarded the Open Minds Lifetime Achievement Award. And some of those clips that you just heard were from his speech at that, when he was awarded that award. He was so thrilled, and so was I. You can see I'm just grinning from ear to ear, and it was a much deserved award. He won many Lifetime Achievement Awards. He was the Grand Marshal at the Roswell Parade. He was going to retire in 2000, ending in 2018. But in 2019, we were preparing for the conference, and he wrote to me and he said, "Oh, Kathy, I really want to go there." And I said, "Well, let me talk to the director on your behalf." And I said, Stanton would love to go. He planned to go again, but unfortunately he passed away 2 months before the conference. Here was Stanton giving his retirement speech at Roswell. There we are, maybe the last time we worked together at the Roswell UFO Museum. And here we are in the conference center. Here we are working together with our books at another conference. We went to many of the same conferences and worked together. And I love this one. It's always nice to be recognized by your peers, the Roswell UFO Hall of Fame. And they have quite a beautiful collection of photographs of Stanton as you go in the front door, where he is in the Hall of Fame. And here he is. Unfortunately, he had to go at some point. He lived to just before his 85th birthday. He hoped to make it to 90. His parents did, but we had to all say goodbye to him. There was an outpouring from around the world of people who had statements to make about how wonderful Stanton was, about his research, about the way he treated everyone that he came into contact with, and the way that he would speak in their language. So these are the 3 books that we wrote together. This is the new book with Rich Dolan's commentary, the definitive work on the most important UFO abduction case in the 20th century. And 2 books I have written without Stanton. I'm working on another one as we speak. And I want to thank you very, very much.
Wow.
Thanks.
Kathleen, thank you so very, very much. We're going to open up to questions. The first one, bear with me. Chris Rutowski asks, can Kathleen talk a bit about Betty's other UFO sightings later in her life?
Yes, I can. Betty, and it wasn't really later in her life when this began. After the hypnosis sessions had ended, Betty contacted Robert Holman and C.D. Jackson. They were 2 of the early investigators They were scientists, they worked for IBM. And they asked Betty to participate in what we now call CE5 experiments. They called them psychophysics experiments back then. And they gave her a script to read at night to try to send telepathic messages to these non-human entities, to ask them to come in so the scientists could see them and could ask them, the craft, to land at different places. So sometimes the scientists did see the craft. And Betty discovered that it took a certain amount of time. It wasn't after asking for this to happen just one time. It took a length of time. And there actually was a UFO landing on my grandparents' farm as well. There was physical trace evidence that was examined. And but later on in Betty's life, she had a very bad reputation for thinking that anything that she saw in the sky was a UFO. I can tell you a little bit about that. And that is because I went out with her a few times, and then I was just disgusted and decided not to go any further. But Betty would go with individuals who would convince her that she was seeing UFOs. And what Betty did, if she did think she was seeing one, I noticed when I was driving with Betty that she would start the car up and she would take off to another location. I think that Betty was still frightened of being taken again. That's what I think was going on there. And
Agree. Yes.
yeah. So there was some
Chris,
misidentification, but Philip Klass really played it up.
another question from Chris. What would you think Stan would say about the UAPTF report that came out in June? Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force Report, if I may, for those who don't know the abbreviation.
I think that Stan would probably respond the same way that I did. And I wrote to our congressman from Florida, Marco Rubio, who introduced that bill. And I said, well, in this report, there is no mention about the long history of studies done by the US Air Force. And I sent him the statistics that I just quoted in this presentation. And I said, in the new report, you have only 5 proposed categories. And you have one of those is just a catch-all of information. So are they planning to put the UAP sightings reports into that catch-all, and birds and psychological and everything else that isn't in the other categories? I said, I thought that they should reconsider, and that they should, if they're going to do a study, make it a very good scientific study based upon the studies that had been done in the past.
Absolutely. Again, we have another one from Aaron Boma. Question: what do you think Stan would say about the 2004 U.S. Navy sightings off of the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz today, particularly with the release of the information?
Well,
Jennifer says that he was very aware.
I talked to Stan about that, and he didn't really want to commit himself. He wanted more information. That's what he was telling me in our conversations. He was curious, he was interested, but I think he wanted to give it more time. Stan was very conservative in my mind, and he would wait before he made a major statement, and he would make that statement time and time again.
Okay, from Christine. Is there any evidence that Betty and Barney's Dachshund was also abducted with them or not? We know they take cattle. Did they take the dog with them?
Well, I don't know if they took the dog. Betty and Barney thought the dog had remained in the car, because when Barney was returned to the car, separate from Betty, He put his hand down. There was the dog kind of squashed up as close as she could get to the front seat. And she was shivering and shaking as if she were very frightened and cold, even though it was a warm night. But what happened to that dog after that is she developed a fungus infection on her skin. And she was a new dog to Betty, so Betty didn't know if she had a history of this or not. She didn't have her veterinary records. But then the substance on Betty's dress was either yeast or fungus. So who knows?
It either rubbed off on the dog or the visitors actually handled the creature. We'll never know, I guess.
Right.
That was interesting. Do we have some more from the audience? Anybody want to come on, Mike? Oh, Jennifer has one. Over to you, Jennifer.
A good friend of mine who's a doctor, Bob Stote, shared with me a story of when he came to visit Betty when she was older, many years after the book was published, and she was outspoken about her own UFO experiences. She had fallen and broken her elbow, I believe, and it was in a cast. And one night she had an odd experience, possibly a visitation, and the cast was removed and her arm was repaired, according to what Bob Stote told me. And I was going to ask Kathy if she was aware of that story or if she wanted to comment on it.
When Betty helped me through college, I promised her that when she grew old, I would take care of her. And when Betty developed cancer, lung cancer, I did take care of Betty. So I knew Bob Stote and had dinner with him and with Betty, as did my husband many times. I liked Bob, and he was looking in on Betty. But the remarkable thing was that the doctors didn't think that those fractured bones would heal because of her cancerous condition and because she was a smoker. But it did heal. And so that was a little kind of miraculous. And also, Betty's daughter was staying with her. I was taking a break, but I would go in every morning. And one particular morning that I went in, the blinds that were usually open were still closed. The front door that was usually unlocked was open, but the deadbolt lock was out. Now, Betty was paralyzed from the waist down, and one of her arms was paralyzed at this point from the Pankos tumor at the top of her chest, which caused excruciating pain. So that was odd, but that is when I saw that cast sitting across the room from Betty on a chair. And Betty and her daughter had both slept very late, although they were light sleepers and were usually awake and dressed very early, always before I arrived. And so this was perplexing. In addition to that, Betty had a cat, Raisa, and that cat was always by her side. For a solid week, Raisa was terrified. She would skirt the perimeter of the living room, going to her litter box or her food, just looking at Betty very suspiciously. Very, very odd behavior from the cat. I checked with the neighbors to see if any of them saw a UFO. No one did see one that night, but there could have been a visitation. Something happened that was unusual.
The animals know. There was a question from Tabitha. Did anyone want to take Betty and Barney to the psych ward after they came back?
Absolutely not. First of all, when they came back, they reported this to the Air Force. Now, when this was made public in 1965, as a result of a violation of confidentiality, Betty and Barney agreed to speak not on the abduction, but on the sighting for the first time. And do you know who introduced them? The public information officer from Pease Air Force Base. So no one doubted their sanity. Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. They were active in community affairs. By the time people knew about this, they were very well known and respected in the state. So no one thought that they were mentally ill.
I think that is part of the reason why the story was so sensational once it came out. These were credible people, not somebody that would be difficult to disbelieve. Aaron Bouma has his hand up. Aaron? Oops, we need to unmute you there, Aaron.
I wanted to thank you guys for everything that you guys have done. Stan Friedman is my uncle, and I'm really pleased of what you guys are doing. And I wanted to thank you for, like, as far as this has gone on. I asked earlier, like, the new stuff that has come out in 2004, USS Nimitz and fighters had seen this object, and it flew and maneuvered much faster and much more capable than anything that we ever had at the time. And I asked, I'm not sure whether she answered that, but what do you think Stan would have said about that? Do you think that he would have said that they're trying to study us, or are they trying to provoke us?
Well, I think that Stan made it quite clear that they thought of us as the primitives in the neighborhood, and they didn't want our style of friendship to be taken out into space to them. So that's one of the reasons. They are not happy with our military. And I think that if Stanton were still alive today, and the Navy has admitted that it's theirs, the scientists who have spoken about it, and the military officers who have spoken about it, talk about the unusual properties, that it defies our current knowledge of the laws of physics, that it can start and travel extremely fast, so fast it would kill a human being very, very quickly. It can hover at 80,000 feet. It can descend to 20,000 feet within a couple of seconds. And then it can hover 50 feet above the ocean and bounce back and forth like a ping pong ball over what appeared to be larger than an aircraft carrier under the surface of the water. We can't do these things. The scientists state quite clearly that we cannot do these things, and no other country on earth can either.
I mean, I remember that, of course, I know that they were not happy, and then studying, like, the military is my passion. That's what I do. I'm a historian for Carleton County area. I mean, the military history alone, coming from this aspect alone, says that, you know, using, like, I mean, testing nuclear weapons, when we started doing that extensively, it became there were the more sightings over the over nuclear weapon storage sites, missile silos. It certainly kept increasing, and certainly the sites of what they called Foo Fighters really had increased in the time period that shows that they were not happy with us in that context.
Yes, absolutely.
Kathleen, and we have a question from Melinda. She really wants to know what your next book is going to be about.
Well, some of it's going to be about my work with Stanton. Some of it will be about my aunt, and some of it will be about my own research and the things that I have learned. And gosh, now it's 60 years of knowledge, but 30 years, almost 31 years of full-time study.
Melinda also asked, is that area around Lincoln known for UFO sightings? I don't know. I live here in the Lincoln area, and I haven't seen any, but
well, in Lincoln, New Hampshire, it is.
Lincoln, New Hampshire. Okay.
Yes, and I I've spoken many times up in that general area. And after I speak, people come up to me and tell me about their own UFO sightings. I've also investigated abduction cases in that area. And in the new book, The New Captured, that has just been released, you will read some of those reports.
Okay. I have another one for you here from Chris Stiles. In the mid-90s, I somehow ended up having supper with Phil Klass and other UFO skeptics after presenting at a conference in Trenton, New Jersey. Klass predicted he was sure that when the day comes that both Friedman and I have left the planet, I predict that no one will understand anything more about UFOs and the so-called phenomena. Of this, I am sure. What is your reaction, Kathleen?
Oh, Philip Klass, supposedly in his obituary, not his obituary, but wrote when he died that he would guarantee that UFO researchers would never have the answer. So that was his prediction. I think he's wrong. Stanton knows he's wrong and always did.
For those who may not be aware, the United States Air Force Base, Loring Air Force Base, was literally about 12 kilometers across the New Brunswick border. There was a significant number of sightings there when it was fully manned over the nuclear storage sites. Since that time, and the bases are now closed down, there are still significant numbers of UFO sightings in the area within 15 to 20 kilometers of the US base, but on the Canadian side. Bright red glowing objects, creatures stepping out of them. I've now talked to half a dozen people now who claim to have seen the same thing in the same place and who were living there at the time when the sightings took place at Loring Air Force Base. And this was pointed out by someone else here earlier on, a large number of sightings over any of the nuclear storage sites. Stanton always says, they're watching us. We're now getting the ability to do terrible things at a great rate of damage and a way to get it launched, and they don't want it coming to them. And of course, his questions to those people who are coming here, why are you here? What's your purpose? Where do you come from? He asked everybody the same three questions, but there are significant numbers of sightings here in New Brunswick and a surprising amount of interest here in the Maritimes. I imagine no matter where you are, and I think you're in Florida at the moment,
Yes,
it's
I
the
am.
same there.
It is.
Sorry.
It is. The public, more of the public is interested than ever before. And in fact, one of the scientists who was a very vocal critic of UFO researchers has recently issued a formal apology to us because he was wrong. That was nice to read.
Yes. Stanton himself was actually a pretty hard-nosed debunker of those who would try to put something over on people, claiming they'd seen everything under the sun. As was pointed out earlier on, Betty in her later years, I don't know, perhaps you do know better if it was dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever it is, but she began to see UFOs everywhere. And that made people think that everything she'd ever said and done was not credible. And that is unfortunate, but Stanton acknowledged that, but in the end was absolutely convinced that she saw what she saw and felt what she felt while she was having that experience.
Yes, she did have a brain tumor. I saw a change in her behavior beginning in, probably the late 1980s. And it was very, very large and it had fingered out into her brain when I was taking care of her. Very sad, but you know, I hate to see her debunked and her credibility brought into question because she had a brain tumor. I mean, to me, it's like debunking everything that Ronald Reagan did as president of the United States, because then he had Alzheimer's.
Again, because so many of us were an aging population, we've been looking after our parents, and many more of us are well aware of Alzheimer's, dementia. The business of aging is catching a lot more of us, and therefore I think people are more understanding. when we were younger and doing all those things that we did and saw and experienced, that doesn't make it untrue because we've gotten old. And that's why I think that the story has not been completely debunked or lost. People are still interested because they realize things change to all of us.
Yes.
Hal, unmute yourself, please. Hal, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
I think I'm there now. Can you hear me? I apologize. I don't want to shut off if there are people who still have some questions. Does anybody have any more to go? And I'm looking over here at chat. Jennifer was talking about a sighting of the famous Allagash abduction story in northern Maine, close to Canada. Chris mentions that Stanton's daughter Melissa was in a few of his classes. He didn't know Stanton was her father at the time. We'd have talked to her a lot more. But there are a lot of sightings up in our part of the world, in the New England area and the maritime area. Are you hearing about this, Kathleen?
I'm not following UFO sightings right now. I'm a specialist in ET contact, and I have investigated probably a couple of thousand cases by now, and I am currently doing a study on the communication between these non-human entities and humans, what they're saying. And that study goes all the way back to 1954, where I was able to acquire some correspondence files between Admiral Herbert Knowles and Wilbert Smith, radio engineer from the Canadian government, and their UFO guy, who were taking part in an experiment, and going right up to the present day. So I'm attempting to, in the three major studies that I worked on experiencers too, with more than 5,000 participating in three different studies, we had open-ended questions. And one of them was, have they ever told you anything? And what we have essentially learned is that, of course, these entities are very, very worried, concerned about our use of nuclear weapons. They say that our technological development is out of sync with our spiritual growth. And when they have seen that occur elsewhere, it has sometimes led to the disintegration of the species. And so this is one of the major concerns that they have written independently. Many experiencers have stated that.
We spoke briefly. I won't ask you to dig into it too deeply, but Stanton loved a good argument. And his thought was that most of the visitors were benign and meant us no harm. The people I've spoken to, not nearly the numbers you have, but of similar experience, say that no, put them into three categories. There's one that are here, they're the scientists. They study us like lab rats or whatever. There's a second group that is genuinely here to help and hopes that we don't wipe ourselves off the face of the universe, so to speak. And there's a third group that are here for no good purpose but their own. Could you comment on that, please?
I can. In the major studies that we've worked on, we found that the most prevalent group is the grays, and different species of grays.
Yes.
Different races of grays. And then the second most prevalent is the human types, Nordic, maybe Nordic types. And they tend to be kind. They don't take genetic material from humans. That's not part of what they do. Then we have the mantis type, that look a lot like praying mantises, very, very, very tall, skeletal maybe have an exoskeleton, who are not kind. They do their job. I've seen black and blue marks on people. I've seen them quite beaten up when they've attempted to resist these mantis types. Sometimes they have grays with them. The smaller grays who act as the assistants and the police officers, you might say, the guards on the craft are there. This type may not even be sentient beings. They could be biorobotic or
Yes.
robotic. And then the reptilian types. Now, some people say that these reptilian types are kind and they're sort of lizard-like or snake-like. They don't have tails. But everyone that I have ever spoken with who has had any interaction with the draconian reptilian type, the kind that looks like a crocodile or an alligator with a tail, has had horrible things happen.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us tonight. And thank you very much for inviting me.
It has been our honor, Kathleen. For those of you who've been watching this show, again, it is recorded. I should mention that Chris Stiles is going to be talking to us next week at the same time. He's going to be talking about the Shag Harbor incident and also Stanton. In any event, it has been an extraordinary evening. Thank you so much again, Kathleen. Thank you for all of you who joined us. And we look forward to seeing you again this time next week. Take care, everyone.
Dark star in the night, glowing, moving into sight. Engines pulsing as you land. Bright star gonna make a stand.